Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with Jeremy Blachman and Cameron Stracher, authors of The Curve, a new novel set in a sinking ship of a law school, which is highly entertaining. Your host today is Alison Monahan. Typically I'm here with Lee Burgess, my co-host, and we're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Career site. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Jeremy Blachman and Cameron Stracher, authors of The Curve, a brand new novel set in a sinking ship of a law school. I read it last night, and I can assure you it's very funny. But more than that, it takes on a number of critical issues in legal education today, and it might make some people think twice about signing up to pay full tuition at a low-ranked law school which offers limited job prospects. So first off, let me ask you two this. Is this book strictly entertainment, or are you trying to make a broader point here about the risks of law school in today's uncertain job environment?
I think it's both. Obviously, I think every book should be entertaining, and I hope our book is entertaining.
It is entertaining. I really enjoyed it.
Great. But no, I mean, we clearly had an idea and a message and a theme in our minds as we were writing it, which is that, law school is not the panacea for the ills for every student who's thinking of, what they should do with their lives.
Right. I mean, you guys both will talk about this in a minute, but you both went to, I'd say pretty fancy law schools, Harvard. I'm sitting here, I went to Columbia. None of us are, well, with the possible exception of Cameron, really practicing law at this point. So tell me a little bit about your backgrounds.
Well, I was fortunate not to have to ever end up practicing. While I was a law student, I started a fictional blog, over-the-top satire from the perspective of a law firm hiring partner.
And just for the record, this is Jeremy who's talking.
Yeah. And the blog was informed by the on-campus recruiting process, and then eventually by my summer as a big firm summer associate. But it somehow ended up tapping into the kinds of feelings a lot of folks were having about firm life, and the blog went viral. People thought I was actually a partner at a firm.
I remember that at the time. Everyone was like, who is this guy? Like, what's that?
In the comments, people were guessing, because I had planted things like, I can see the ocean from the window of the firm, and people were like, well, that means he's at this firm or that firm or that firm, and I was just making something up, so I had no idea.
You're like, probably you're in a big city, probably is on a coast, so chances are good, you're probably gonna have an ocean view if there's an ocean nearby because you're a big firm partner.
Right, and so while I was still a law student, I got a deal to turn the blog into a novel, and that sort of gave me enough credibility that I've been able to work as a writer ever since, without having to actually practice, but I feel very lucky that happened because I really couldn't have planned it that way.
Right. I mean, was that, when you went to law school, were you thinking like, oh, I'll just go to law school because that's what you do if you're an English major, or were you thinking like, oh, I want to be a lawyer, or were you thinking this is just going to be a stepping stone into my, unknown lawyer, writer career path? Like, what were your thoughts?
I knew I wanted to be a writer. I had absolutely no idea how to go about making that happen. I had written for a theater group as an undergrad, and I had no idea how to turn that into a paying job. So I worked for a software company for a couple of years, and then I figured I don't really want to work for a software company.
Were you writing code? Because that's what I did for years.
No. I was doing marketing, writing brochures, video content. The best job I could have had at a software company. It was a super creative job, but it was a software company.
Yeah.
So I ended up figuring law school would at least give me a backup plan, and it would buy me, albeit at a very expensive cost, 3 years to figure out how to become a writer. I didn't think I would end up writing about the law, about law firms, about stuff like that. But it just turned out that way. At least in.
Let's kind of talk about that a little bit, because I'm interested too. Cameron's also, I know that you've written some books about the legal profession and some not. I mean, it seems to be this pretty rich area for writers. I mean, I was a big firm lawyer for a while. I clerked. I mean, there's a lot of material here.
There is, and I also think that, I mean, maybe the three of us are just good examples of it, but there are so many people who are interested in writing go into law because it seems like a place where if you're interested in language and you're interested in writing, it at least offers, a fairly lucrative career path where maybe you still might be doing some of that writing. And
you definitely be writing. You might just be writing like discovery requests.
Right. I mean, well, that's the thing. I mean, I think that and hopefully maybe that's something that people take away from in our book. But I mean, obviously both Jeremy and I went to law school for the same reasons Jeremy did. I did not really want to be a lawyer. I did not know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something creative and something, in the writing field. But when I got out of law school, I didn't have the success that Jeremy had, and I went to a big firm, and I was really miserable there. And I quickly ditched it and, went and got an MFA in creative writing. But even then, after I got the MFA, I realized I was going to have to do something to earn a living because writers did not earn a living by just writing. And I came back to New York and started practicing law again.
I find that interesting that you practice and that you've also taught, right? Like media law.
Yep.
How's that working out?
Well, I have to say right now it's working out pretty well, except for the crazy demands on my time. But I mean, there was a time, I would say the first 8 years of my legal practice. Well, actually, that's not really true. When I first started and I was at a firm, I was really, really miserable. And when I came back to New York and I was at a firm, I was really, really miserable as well. Then I decided that I needed to get a job in a field of the law that I might be able to stomach. And I was lucky enough to get a job at CBS. And once I started working as a media lawyer, I began to enjoy what I was doing as a lawyer. And now I do, full-time media law, and actually I like it very much. And I'm not sure if I were to make, a huge success at writing that I would really completely give up media law, because I have some great clients and some really interesting work that I like a lot. But I think I'm very fortunate and unusual in that respect.
Yeah, I think listening to you talk, I think it's so interesting because a lot of law students, I talk with law students or pre-laws a lot, and they're like, oh, if I can just get into Harvard, like my life is going to be perfect. And, if I could just get that firm job, my life is going to be perfect. And I'm listening to you and I'm nodding along and saying, yeah, I pretty much hated like the time I spent in a firm too, Yeah. So, I mean, what is like, and you've been in a law school too, a law school environment. Like what's going on here? Why do people think that this is sort of the holy grail? And then the people who get there are like, God, I'm so miserable. Like I've got to find something else to do and just ditch this completely.
I think people get confused by the money. Not that they're seduced by it all the time and feel like, I don't know, I feel like because the jobs pay well, people assume, well, they have to be good jobs, they pay well.
Well, so kind of the opposite. It's like they pay well because they're terrible jobs.
But it feels legitimate. I mean, I went to law school thinking, at least this sounds like a legitimate career. I can say to someone, I'm a law student or I'm a lawyer, and they're not going to look at me like I'm
like a total loser?
Right, exactly. So
I'm also, I'm older than Jeremy. I have a 20-year-old son. And I can see that when you're that age, there's so much anxiety about what you're going to do and what you're expected to do and how you are supposed to live and how you want to live. It's a very, very scary period in your life. And law school just seems like a good, welcome, warm excuse of a place where you can kind of put things on hold for another 3 years, and you don't need organic chemistry to go there. And it just becomes a default position for a lot of people who are just, they're very very, very scared about what they're going to do with their lives.
Yes, definitely. And Lee and I have done a podcast pretty much on this topic, which ends with me in one of probably my favorite podcast moments ever, with me literally yelling, go be the barista. Just be a barista if you have to. Like, don't go to law school for this reason. Just do something.
Before you go to law school, everyone says you can do anything with a law degree. Everyone says it, and then you get there. And I feel like it was about a week in when I went to the first on-campus recruiting orientation, and I realized, wait a minute. everyone coming to recruit is a law firm. So that means that I can be a lawyer with a law degree.
Right. Uh-oh. Kind of a rude awakening, right?
Yeah, I was like, where are these other jobs people say you can do with a law degree? And of course, you can eventually do all sorts of things with a law degree, or you can go outside of the kinds of jobs that are coming to get you, and you can find things that are out there that you may or may not need the law degree for. But it feels a lot more open and it feels like there are a lot more opportunities after you go to law school before you go to law school.
No, absolutely. I mean, I had somebody...
once you're there, there's a path everybody's on.
Yeah, it's like a conveyor belt. And if you don't want to end up where that conveyor belt ends up, you probably shouldn't ever start getting on it. No, I mean, I had this conversation a couple of days ago with someone who's like, yeah, my father really wants me to go to law school. He says you can do anything with a law degree. I'm like, you can do whatever you can do now because you're like a smart, competent person after you go to law school. It's just you're going to wasted 3 years of your life and $200,000 of your parents' money. Is that a good reason to go to law school? I don't think so. But hey, your choice.
I've also been on the other side, though, and I have to say it's not fun on that side either, because, I mean, I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop with a lot of really talented people, and a lot of them are doing really crappy jobs right now.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years later, as they all tried and continued to write. And I mean, I looked at that life, and that's eventually why I came back to New York, because I thought to myself, well, I can be a waiter and write books for the next 10 years, or a carpenter and write books for the next 10 years, or I can be a lawyer and write books for the next 10 years.
And make a pretty decent living on the side.
Exactly. And it just seemed to me like being a lawyer was, all right, maybe it wasn't so great and I'd have some misery, but being a waiter sucked too. And you didn't make as much money.
Yeah, you had to work a lot more hours to pay your rent working as a waiter. No, I think it's Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, who writes in one of his books, he talks about this idea of like having a plan Z. And he's like, your plan Z is what you go back to if like everything else falls apart and you really need to make money. And I think, for me, I mean, it's the same reason that basically I could start a business. It's like, well, if all else fails, I'll just go back and, work at a law firm. Like, yeah, I don't love it, but I know I can do it. And I think that gives you potentially the flexibility, to do something else. Of course, then you've got to think about the debt load, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the book, because I don't want to give away any key plot points, but some of this seems like it could really be ripped from the headlines or from like the latest above the law. So tell me a little bit about it to the extent that you want to, let people in on what it's about.
Well, I thought, the interesting thing about writing about this world was that I don't think too many people have written about the third and fourth tier law schools. So much stuff is written about the Harvards of the world, and yet most law schools are not Harvard. And what happens to the students at these places? What are their lives like? What are their career options? And I don't know, I mean, Jeremy can speak for himself, but I thought one of the really interesting things and fun things we tried to do in this book was to think about that world and explore the realities of what happens to students who are at these other schools, the not Harvards of the world.
Right, as they would say on, above all, the third tier toilet schools.
Yeah, right. And I think the reality for those students has totally changed over the past decade or so. I mean, I guess even at the height of the market, not everyone was getting a job at a big firm, but a lot of people were, and at least those jobs were out there if you finished in the top X percent of your class, and then that percentage has gotten smaller and smaller, it seems, and it's really a lot more difficult, and yet people still go to these schools because it still screams, this is a legitimate thing to do, this is a place to go, you can be a lawyer, or maybe not.
And the law schools themselves are complicit in it. I mean, as we know from all these lawsuits that have been filed in the wake of the crashing of the market, I mean, students are feeling like they are being ripped off or misled by these schools because, of course, the schools have an incentive to keep students coming. They don't want to say to students, guys, you're going to spend $200,000. And guess what? Only 5% of our graduates make more than $80,000 a year. And in fact, our average graduate is unemployed or working at Starbucks right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing is pretty upsetting. And, you know, I mean, I've certainly got articles sort of trying to explain the situation to people and be like, you know, you really, I mean, at the risk of sounding really cynical, like you really can't trust these schools. You know, their incentives are not necessarily aligned with yours as a potential student. And I think people, I mean, how do people, what should you do if you're in this scenario and you're like, okay, I'm not going to get into Harvard, but I've always wanted to be a lawyer. You know, my parents don't have resources to pay for this. I'm going to be doing it myself. Like, what should people be looking at?
I think that the problem is that too many students, I mean, as we've talked about before, look at law as a default position. I mean, if you talk about, you know, rational economic actors, I don't think that college students or newly graduated college students are very rational actors, and I don't think their parents are. So I don't think they are they're asking the hard questions, which really ought to be, you know, what is this school? What are the percentages of students at this school ending up doing? And what do I have to do to be one of those students who are successful? And am I willing to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And sort of, does the job you want line up with the kind of job most people can get? If your dream is to work at a place like Skadden, if your dream is to work at a top firm, maybe you just can't do that at a law school that is not a top law school. But if your dream is to do public interest work and you're okay getting paid what those people get paid, and you're okay doing the kinds of jobs that you do need a law degree for, but the people doing those jobs come from all sorts of schools, maybe that is a realistic plan. But I think if you don't have a plan at all, then you're risking really being disappointed when you don't end up with any options out of some of these schools.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I always tell people, you know, get really serious about figuring out what is the average outcome at this school. Are you okay with that outcome? Because if you're not okay with that outcome, and, you know, frankly, that outcome may be you're unemployed, you don't pass the bar. I mean, the bar passage rates in some of these places are unbelievably low. And it's like, if you can't pass the bar exam, what did you just spend 3 years doing? This is a complete and total waste of time and money. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's very buyer beware.
Yeah, and, you know, once you're at these schools, you have to be willing to do the work and graduate in the top part of your class. Because, I mean, the thing that I saw, and I taught at a so-called third-tier law school for many years, 9 years. A lot of students, once they're in law school, they just figure like, okay, well, I did what my parents wanted me to do. Now I'm here. But, you know, they're going to graduate in the bottom half of the class, and those students are never going to get jobs, ever.
Right, and frankly, most of them aren't going to pass the bar either. You know, sure. In a place like New York or California, like these are not, you know, it's not like you just walk in there not having done anything for 3 years in law school and sit down and pass the California or New York bar. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
Yeah. But at least none of the schools, even the worst school out there, isn't as bad as the school in our book.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about this. I mean, I love the location of it. There's some pretty funny scenes.
Yeah, it is on the Gowanus Canal, on the toxic banks of the Gowanus Canal. But they're trying to fool people right from the start, even with the name of the school, because they're calling the school Manhattan Law School, trading on the better borough. Or if you go to our website, you'll see that it's actually named after someone with the last name Manhattan. So they're not fooling anyone at all. But yeah, starting from that setting, we tried to really imagine the most over the top, the worst of the worst. How bad can these professors be? How can these students be really the worst students we can find? Or in most cases, of course, we have a few that end up triumphing in the end, but for the most part, this is a really bad place to be.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very pleasant. One of the things I really enjoyed about the book, which I think is actually probably plays out in real life too, is that, of course, all the professors at the school, and particularly, you know, your two sort of heroes, are all from these top schools, you know, the Harvards, the Yales of the world, and they find themselves in this very, very different environment dealing with students where, you know, they're like not paying attention, they're answering their phones, they're doing all kinds of stuff, which I think that's actually a very interesting dynamic that plays out everywhere.
Yeah, the legal academy is the only place where the people who are teaching students to do a job do not want to do that job themselves.
Oh, they've run like fleeing from that job as quickly as possible if they ever practice at all.
Think about how that crazy that is. You'd never find that in medical school. People who teach in medical school are practicing doctors who, presumably enjoy being doctors and are teaching young people to be doctors. People who teach in philosophy graduate programs are philosophy graduates who are teaching other people who want to be philosophy graduates. But law professors are lawyers who hated practicing law.
Although I will say, I did a master's in architecture, and some of those people still practice like as a hobby, but a lot of them are a little bit more on the law side where they're like, I didn't really like having to actually build stuff, so why don't I talk to you about what to do?
All right, well, that's interesting. I mean, that to me, there's something wrong with a profession where the people teaching it don't want to be doing it.
I think it is unique to law, like the actual like visceral hatred of their previous jobs, which many of them have. I mean, why are these firm jobs so terrible in your opinion? Because I agree with you. I think they're horrible.
I think it's just because they're all consuming and you have no control over the day-to-day. You're working on things and you're not really given any... You're just a cog. You're just doing a small piece of something. It isn't really yours, and you can be asked to stay all night at the last minute without having any warning. So your life isn't really yours anymore.
No, it's exactly how I describe it. I'm like, basically they owned my time, so they owned my life. And at some point, I wanted my life back more than I wanted the money.
Yeah. And the economic incentive, if you think about it from a partner's perspective or from the firm perspective, is to break a task down into as many little trivial pieces as possible and then scatter them out to as many young associates as possible, because the more people billing time on that, the better for the partner and the better for the firm. So that if people can do the really, really mundane, trivial stuff and do a ton of it, that's just much better for the law firm in general.
Yeah, I remember getting comments like, yeah, your work is really great, everybody's really happy with it, but it's not really taking you long enough.
Love it.
And it's just one of those things where you're like, so you're telling me you want me to bill more time to do the same thing? Oh, no, of course we're not telling you to pad your hours, but we're telling you to pad your hours.
The one thing I really love about my job now, and this is partly a result of just being older, but also being in-house and being able to advise clients, is I cut to the substantive issues almost immediately. My clients don't want to know, how well I can bait stamp or how many documents I can produce over the course of, 3 nights in a warehouse. They need answers on like important substantive issues, and they need them quickly, and I don't have time to research, and they value my advice and they look to me for it. I mean, that's very rewarding. But unfortunately, it takes a very, very long time to reach that place, and most people don't get to it.
No, it's interesting. I remember the judge that I clerked for, which was a great experience and highly recommended if anyone can do that. That's a great legal job. But I remember him saying to me at the end of the year, we kind of had this lunch to go over how the year had went, wish me well on my future endeavors. And he basically said that to me. He's like, you're really good at cutting to the chase, which is a great skill for a partner, but I'm not sure it's going to serve you well as an associate.
Yeah.
Which is kind of...
I remember once as an associate picking up the phone, and it was a client who had called and he wanted an answer to a question. And so sort of off the cuff, I gave them the best answer that I thought I could give them at the time. And I got so much grief from the partner. Never do that when a client calls. Do not give him an answer to a question. Tell him you'll get back to him and then come see me immediately. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, now when I hire lawyers, I'm like, I just need an answer. I don't if I have a trademark question, you just tell me when's the deadline, what do we need to file, what do you need? I don't want to have this conversation. Just tell me what to do.
Right.
So that's the client's perspective. You're like, just cut to the chase. Just like, give me what I need to know and don't like screw around with this. But obviously that's not the billable incentive at a firm.
No, it's not. Yeah, not at all.
Well, anyway, I think the takeaway from this is if people are thinking that, they're going to get their dream job after they go to Harvard, maybe think twice about whether you actually want that job or not. All right. So I think we've covered a little bit of this, but let me just sort of, to really pin you down on this. Should I go to law school if I was an English major and I really want to be a writer?
Probably not. If you really want to be a writer... It worked
out fine for you guys, right?
I can't... I don't think anyone can predict how it's going to go for them, though, because I I was very lucky that I started blogging at a time when blogs were just becoming interesting enough to the mainstream publishing world that they wanted to turn a blog into a book. Because even doing the same thing and getting the same audience 5 years later, I don't think I would have gotten a book deal.
No, so I think it's a lot harder now.
Yeah, and I think that if you really want to be a writer, you have to write and you have to find your voice. And maybe you also want to be a lawyer and then you go to law school and you do something and you find your own path. But even though it worked out for me, to whatever extent it is working out, I don't think I would tell myself to go to law school. Knowing how it worked out, sure, but that was
you one were pretty path lucky, out of let's face number.
It. What?
Said you were pretty lucky, let's face
right.
it.
Right, yeah.
The timing was good and, everything, all the stars aligned on that one. I don't think people could necessarily take your experience as a sort of average outcome.
Right. I wouldn't tell myself to go to law school because for me, the selection of jobs that I could have gotten with a law degree was not a selection of jobs that I was interested in. And I didn't really know that before law school, but I knew it pretty quickly when I was there and was looking for anything else that I could do. I mean, I spent my first summer working for a small publishing company. I didn't even do a legal job that summer because I wanted to see if maybe that was a world that I could jump into. But I did not need a law degree to do that, and I felt like there was a pretty good chance I was going to regret going to law school right from the very start.
Did you consider leaving?
No, because I didn't have a better plan.
Right.
And the reasons that I went were still the reasons. They were still, but I remember before I got the book deal, before the blog became a big thing, but I remember that the friends of mine who knew about the blog, and there were a few, they were all like, why are you doing this? You're just sabotaging your chances of actually getting a job if anyone finds out who you are. And what is the end game? And I said, I don't know what the end game is. And I took a long walk one day and I was trying to think, could I make a list of the people who are in a better position than I was as far as like trying to be a writer and who were the same age? And I was trying to like count them up. Like, at least I have a law degree, so I'm better than people who don't. Maybe, am I? But I haven't published anything. So, and that was a really useless conversation with myself. And all it did was make me sad. So I would not recommend going to law school if you want to be a writer.
You sabotaged your legal career so that you could write. I understand that. In a way, I think
that was the plan.
I think I did the same because when I quit, I was at Covington and Burling, and I went to Iowa, and people said to me, "You are screwing yourself and screwing all that money and time you spent." But I'm more on the fence now than Jeremy. I don't know. I think that I've been very fortunate to be able to have had a career and support a family and do a lot of fun, good stuff in my life. The one thing, though, that I would say to a person who's interested in writing but also trying to keep law in their life is you can always get off of that treadmill. I left a law firm job. I left a partnership at a good law firm because I wanted to keep writing. And I think you always have to remember what it is that you love and not let the other thing that you do to pay the bills overtake and overcome that thing that you love. Because it's very easy to do that once you get on the law school treadmill.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, for me, one of the reasons I left the firm was actually I was theoretically going to write this book that I'd started in law school, which has never became a book, became the website, and then all this other stuff kind of took off. I think people underestimate sort of how consuming the life of a firm lawyer is, but as I've gotten further away from that, I've started to understand that there are lots of different ways to practice law. And, so maybe the life of a firm lawyer is not going to work out if you also want to be a writer, but, as Cameron, you've done, you can turn that into something else that does work. And I think sometimes there's this sort of all or nothing viewpoint of law students or young lawyers, like, this is the only job I can get. It's like, no, you're like, at a minimum, you're always capable of hanging out a shingle if you've passed the bar, and then you create your own career.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. My law school roommate is a partner at Davis Polk. That was his choice. I could never do what I do and be a partner at Davis Polk. And I don't make the money he does. Maybe I don't have the, whatever that he does, but I still have been able to write and had a pretty good life. I'm not dead yet.
You have had.
Life, with those choices.
And I think that a lot of this applies to law students too. I mean, like we talked about, it's easy to get on this treadmill of, either getting these firm jobs if you're at a fancy school or just getting any job if you're at, the Manhattan Law School. But I think, the happiest people I know are the people who made choices deliberately in law school about what they were going to focus on and what they were going to do. I mean, I love the parts in the book, too, about the law review because, I was on the law review. I hated the law review. There was no reason for me to be on the law review. But why did I do it? Because everyone told me I had to. It's like I could have said no to that. I could have walked away. But
yeah, I mean, I picked up the law review packet intending to do it over winter break or whenever it was, and I realized as I was starting to basically wade into this big pile of paper that I really was not interested, and I also wasn't going to write a very good packet until I wasn't going to be chosen, but that's besides the point. But yeah, throughout law school, I feel like you're faced with, there are things you can do to do well in your classes, and there are things that you don't necessarily need to do that other people might be doing, like spending all day in the library trying to memorize every last thing you could possibly memorize for an open book test. You don't have to. You don't have to be that person. You could still do well in law school. You could still end up with options, potentially, but you can also save whatever part of you is otherwise going to die.
I like that.
That's a great one. Save yourself, students. We're actually about out of time. Are there any final words of wisdom, either on writing, law school, being a lawyer, anything like that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I think that the theme that we're getting from this is be true to yourself. You have to do what your heart tells you have to do, and you will have to make sacrifices and make choices. You can't have everything, but I don't know. It makes me sad when I see students who I feel like they feel they don't have a choice, and they do. They don't have to go to law school.
Right.
And once they can make choices about what they're doing.
Absolutely. That's one of the things, we say over and over to people is like, look, you're making a choice to be here. No one's holding a gun to your head. It's actually a very big privilege in a lot of ways to have this opportunity, and you can walk away from it and that's fine. But if you're there, do something with it.
Yeah, take advantage of it, or don't be there.
Yeah, exactly. Or just drop out. That's fine too. And there are plenty of people who went for a semester or a year or whatever to law school, decided it wasn't for them, and saved another $80,000 or whatever it works out. It's probably 1 year at this point. But don't even get me started. All right, Jeremy, any final thoughts?
I mean, I feel like even though I talk about how it doesn't necessarily open doors to have a law degree, you don't necessarily have all these amazing options besides becoming a lawyer. It doesn't close doors either, and so I think people can do all sorts of things with a law degree, even if they could have done them without them. Law school, the education is not the worst thing to have. You meet people, the classes are sort of interesting. It's not like, it is a lot of debt, but it's not like it's going to necessarily destroy your life just to go and realize you made a mistake afterwards and you don't actually want to be a lawyer. So I think people can survive either way, whether they want to be a lawyer or they don't. They can survive going to law school.
Yeah, it's funny. No one ever asked me about walking away from my master's in architecture, but people are crazy about me walking away from this law. Like literally, I entered the country the other day, come through immigration. The guy's quizzing me, what do you do? Blah, blah, blah. Say, I run this business. We work with law students. Oh, are you a lawyer? No, I used to be a lawyer. You just walked away from that? I'm like, yep. He's like, why? I'm like, because I got tired of working 80-hour weeks for asshole partners, which apparently was good enough to get into the country. So with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a rating and a review on iTunes because we'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to me at Alison at Law School Toolbox, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. And if you would like a copy of The Curve, which I highly recommend, You can get yourself one on Amazon or at your favorite book retailer, which should be in stores soon. You can also like The Curve on Facebook. The Curve novel is what you should look for. You can hear about events and press, and you should definitely check out their website, which is a fully fleshed out satire of a law school website that they hope gives a fun taste of the humor in the book, and that's at cmanhattanlawschool.com. We'll put all of this in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and thanks so much to Jeremy and Cameron.